Yeah, at the very outset, we were told millions of people were going to die. Millions of Americans were going to die. This was going to be something like the Spanish flu back in 1918. So we don't want to kill anybody,
Right.
obviously. So we said, hey, if this is as deadly as we're hearing, we need to obey what the leaders are telling us. So I said, we'll do a live stream, and we translated it into 5 languages, and it went around the world, and our people watched on television. After about 3 or 4 weeks, they started to come back. We didn't say anything. They knew I was preaching in the worship center every Sunday. They just started coming back, and there were dozens, and then there were hundreds, and then there were thousands. And they began to realize that the narrative just did not match reality. When it became apparent that 99.99% of Californians will survive this, they didn't believe that this was a legitimate fear. They just said, look, we're adults, we're going to make our own decision. We didn't say anything about them coming back. We didn't mandate that. We just wanted to see what the people would decide on their own when reality took over from the, I think, purposeful fear that was thrown out at everybody at the beginning.
We've got some evangelicals that have been pushing back on y'all's decision. Did that shock you at all?
It doesn't shock me for a number of reasons, Allie Beth. And the number one reason, I think, is that pragmatism has had such a huge impact on the church, that the church is more concerned about what the unbelieving world thinks of it than it is about ministering to the saints. The church has become an event to attract non-believers. So if you're going to do that, then you've got to buy into the conventional attitudes of those people and not offend them. If that's your goal, that's what pragmatic goals will do. Then you got to go with the flow of the culture. You can't go against that. So from my standpoint, look, the only stock and trade we have is the truth. The church is the pillar and ground of the truth. We want our people to know the truth about the Bible. But, the Apostle Paul said, preach the word in season and out of season. What he meant by that is preach the word in relation to the seasons you're in. Jesus said to the Pharisees and scribes, you can tell the weather, but you don't know the season of redemption you're in. And I think being able to understand what is going on and to preach in accordance with that, without attacking the culture, without basically shaming people in any way, we have to be the people of the truth. So we never have told our people that we buy into the pandemic. We've given them statistics continually, and they have seen them themselves. California right now, there is, I suppose, with COVID, 1 death per 100,000 people. And they're still mandating a complete lockdown and trying to lock down Grace Church with that low death rate. So there's much more to this than any kind of health issue.
I know you can't speculate, but if you could, what do you think are some of the motives behind a lockdown that just doesn't seem to correlate with science, and maybe just even in relation to shutting down things like worship?
Yeah, first of all, we did a little study, and the number of deaths in California this year from January to August is exactly the rate it's been going for the last 10 years. There's about 15 more deaths this year per 100,000 by all means of death than there were in 2019. This is not an epidemic. The numbers indicate to us that something else is going on. Masks is another issue. If you want to go around with a bacterial zoo on your face and think that's going to make you healthy, I don't think you're thinking very deeply about that. But the proof of one thing is coming out in all of this. You don't need an army to conquer a nation. All you need is fear.
Right.
And you can literally overpower. Look, this country has sacrificed tens of thousands of lives to gain our freedom, and people are going to give it all up if the government will protect them from some nebulous virus.
Right.
It shows you the weakness of this generation. It shows you the susceptibility to suggestion and the ease with which fear can dominate people. not related to reality, actually. And the fear is so great that if you don't do what you should do, you get yelled at in very many places. So it's a palpable fear that people have. We've tried to quietly remove that fear by just doing what we normally do, and people come and they're not afraid, they're joyful, they're happy, they're thrilled to be here, and thousands are coming and more every single week. We've got them all over the campus, outdoors, indoors, in the tent, in every room in our facility, and they're not afraid. And I just think carrying out the narrative now for thinking people is a really hard thing to do.
Wow. And Pastor, has the president reached out? Has he responded? Have you had a conversation with him?
Yes, as a matter of fact, not last Sunday, but the Sunday before, he called me after the Sunday morning service, and he was very gracious and said, I just want to thank you for taking a stand. Church is essential, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And then we talked a little bit about why, from certainly a biblical standpoint, Christians could not vote Democratic. Because there's no way that a Christian can affirm the slaughter of babies, homosexual activity, homosexual marriage, or any kind of gross immorality. No way we could, stand behind a candidate who was affirming transgender behavior, which of course is really the reprobate mind of Romans 1. So I said, these things aren't even political for us, sir. I said, these things are biblical. These things are laid down by the Word of God, and we love God. We desire to honor Him, and upholding righteousness in a society is what a church is supposed to do. So I said, any real, true believer is going to be on your side in this election, because it's not just an individual, it's an entire set of policies that Christians cannot in any way affirm.
Could you give some encouragement to people who maybe they're in a church where their pastor is not taking the same stance that you are, but they wish that they were, and they're just afraid. They're afraid of encroaching restrictions by the government on things like freedom of worship, and maybe they're looking to the horizon and they're seeing the possibility of more severe persecution of Christians in this country. And they're maybe not afraid of the virus, but they're afraid of that, and they just don't know what to do, and they don't see enough leaders standing up. What would be your encouragement to that Christian right now?
Well, look, first of all, the Word of God commands you to worship, to come together, to not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. Come together to stimulate one another to love and good works. In the book of 1 Corinthians, when the Apostle Paul is writing to the church and talking about the Lord's table, in that chapter, over and over, it says, when you come together, when you come together, when you come together, when you come together. This is the church. The church isn't a video experience. The church is life on life. And you need to be the church. You also need not only to follow the Word of God, but also realize Christ is the head of the church, not any political entity, not any government agency, and not any person in power. Christ is the head of the church. Give glory to Him by being the church. And then you need to understand that you don't really have anything to fear in terms of the threat of this virus, because the statistics are just so minuscule. The deaths are people, basically, I'll give you one statistic. In California, the average death of COVID is 78. In California, the average death normally is age 78. So there's not a significant difference from this virus and any other normal year. So you have to do that examination to the point where you can satisfy your own mind. But I think it's even more than that. I think people know that they don't see dead bodies all around, that their worlds, they may know somebody who had COVID and didn't even know they had it, but they found out when they were tested, or they may know somebody that had an illness. But we know it isn't a deadly illness. Everybody should know that, and you have to decide what your priorities are. We always say, I'm not concerned about people dying of COVID. I'm concerned about people dying in sin. Mm-hmm. And 100% of the people who are alive are going to die. And after that, the judgment. And we need to be the light for the gospel. I tell pastors, have church and let Christ defend you.